Welcome to Crossroads. Money being sent home by foreign workers here in the United States could soon be up for taxation. Remittances, they call them, right? They're a top incentive for a lot of people, especially illegal immigrants looking to work right here in the United States. And there are very broad systems set up to help them send money home to their families or their communities back where they came from. All that money up for taxation. AP said this. It said House Republicans have included in President Donald Trump's big priority bill a 5% excise tax on remittance transfers that would cover more than 40 million people, including green card holders and non-immigrant visa holders, such as people on H-1B, H-2A, and H-2B visas. It notes that U.S. citizens would be exempt, so Americans sending money to other countries, don't worry about it. It notes that Trump also recently announced that he is finalizing a presidential memorandum to, quote, shut down remittances sent by people in the U.S. illegally, effectively eliminating the motivation to come here and work if you're an illegal immigrant. That's, of course, in addition to the bill right now. But it adds this. White House and Treasury officials have not responded to requests for comment from the Associated Press on specifics of the presidential memorandum that Trump previewed in an April 25th Truth Social post and how it would work. But it notes that Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum shot back against the measure and called on Republican lawmakers to reconsider it, saying, quote, it would damage the economy of both nations and is also contrary to the spirit of economic freedom that the U.S. government claims to defend. It notes further in that remittance experts, local leaders, and former migrants say that banning, limiting, or adding a tax on certain remittances could damage communities that rely on them. They're not talking about American communities, talking about communities in other countries. It notes they would prove burdensome to American citizens and firms and paradoxically end up causing even more illegal migration to the U.S., they say. Basically because you have a lot of communities in Latin America, and I'll get into that in a minute, a lot of communities in Latin America that actually depend on remittances, and they're arguing that if you cut that off, they're going to be forced to find additional work, and they might try to find that work right here in the United States. Now, notes the U.S. influx of money provides an important economic lifeline to residents of poorer towns that often have little access to jobs or income. This is in other countries, but they're saying it's America's problem. It says remittances provide opportunities for people in their home country, making it less likely they would take the risk of migrating to the United States, the experts say. Now, like I've noted this before, remittances represent a huge amount of wealth for a lot of countries, especially in Latin America. Mexico, they get quite a bit, but actually other countries, it's a huge chunk of their GDP. This is basically where people come to the United States, they work. This is not just illegal, it's even legal workers here. They find jobs, and what do? They send the money back to their countries, right? They send it back home. It goes to their children, it goes to their family members, and a lot of poorer communities that have the young men come here to work, their economies depend on this, actually. The money they send back goes to, really a whole lot further than it does here. In America, working for a week, they might make what they would otherwise make in a month or several months or even longer in the countries they come from. And again, for a lot of communities, actually in Mexico, a lot of Central American countries, this is a huge chunk of where the wealth comes from. Now, look, on that point, the tax that's being discussed for remittances, it's not that high. They're not talking about like seizing all remittances. They're talking about 5%, a 5% excise tax on it. And there have been proposals that are actually a lot more strict on this. We'll see what Trump's memorandum actually says if or when he does it. He did preview it recently. But look, without remittances, a huge motivation for people to work illegally in the United States basically goes away. Although they do argue more people might try to illegally immigrate. We'll see if that can happen because of the border security right now. It's very difficult for people to illegally immigrate unless they're already here. This would disincentivize people who are currently here. Now, on the point of the bill, this is all tied in with Congress pushing through what Trump has been calling the one big beautiful bill. Here's what House Ways and Means Chairman Jason Smith has to say on it. This is on the official site, the House of Representatives, on Monday. He said, quote, "This bill delivers on what Americans voted for with President Trump's promise to put America first, with tax policies that reward hard work, bring jobs back home, increase opportunity, and rebuild the economy for the working class." He says it puts the interests of low-income working families ahead of the wealthy by expanding tax relief to those who need it most, including the president's priorities of no tax on tips and overtime pay and additional relief for America's seniors. He notes as well that small businesses and family farmers will benefit from the certainty provided so they can invest in their futures and grow jobs. And this is the important part on this topic, at least. He says, under the economic policies of President Biden and Washington Democrats, the wealthy and well-connected benefited from taxpayer handouts. The Ways and Means Republican tax bill ends special interest giveaways and will hold the woke elite, they claim, and entities that benefit from the tax code accountable. It will halt the flow of taxpayer dollars to illegal immigrants in China. Halting the flow of taxpayer dollars to illegal immigrants in also China. Now, look, the statement also notes that it prevents taxpayer benefits from going to illegal immigrants. It's going to require a Social Security number for individuals claiming tax credits and deductions. It's going to end illegal immigrants, their eligibility for Obamacare premium tax credits and Medicare. Even California right now, Gavin Newsom is talking about making illegal immigrants no longer eligible for free health care, unless it's like maternal services, and they have like one other thing. And also applying new fees on remittance payments from illegal immigrants to outside the United States. Now, what's the logic behind this? If you understand how economies work, you need internal flow of money, not external flow. Basically, if people work a job, what happens? They get paid, they take that pay, they go to other businesses, they spend it within the economy. It's like going to the casino, you're spending money in the casino, not in another casino, right? And so you go to the United States, you make money, you go to a restaurant, you spend the money. What happens with that money? That money, of course, goes to the workers, goes to the owner, goes to the supply chains, all the products they buy to stock the shelves, and that's how you have money flowing within the economy. If you go to another store and you buy a product at that store, that means, of course, you purchase the product, you support the product maker, you support the store, you support the employees, and through this, again, you have this internal circulation of cash within an economy. But if you have people taking money they work for and either not spending it all at all or sending it outside the country, then the flow of cash from those jobs does not flow within the American economy. It benefits a foreign economy. And that's one of the big arguments against remittances. In fact, that's one of the reasons historically, in terms of balancing international trade, why countries would actually use tariffs. You want to offset the outflow of currency to make sure that money is flowing equally within your economy and that, again, an equal weight is not flowing outside effectively. Benefits the workers, maybe not the government itself when you do that. But on the other side of the argument, though, many people are saying the 5% tax on remittances, they're saying this will have a huge negative impact on poor communities, not in the United States, but in other countries. It's been rumored for a while now that Trump might even take actions against remittances. Again, he's talking about it right now, even as recently as April. But last year, this was America's Quarterly, November 2024, they were saying this. They said, for decades, remittances have been a critical pillar of Latin American and Caribbean economies, representing a lifeline for the poorest families and a major boost for the region's middle classes. In other words, these countries depend on sending illegal workers, or even legal ones, here to the United States and depend on them sending money out of the country back to where they came from. It says a record $159 billion was received last year, that'd be 2023, up from $62 billion a decade ago. A lot more money is flowing out of our economy now. And they say, but now the landscape may change. This was last year again. They say during his campaign, President-elect at the time, Donald Trump, promised to deport millions of undocumented workers and restrict legal immigration to the U.S. to reset the nation's migration policy, potentially reducing the number of senders and the amount of money flowing to the region. meaning flowing out of the American economy. And they say, meanwhile, proposals to tax remittances, this is what Republicans are talking about doing right now, putting taxes on them, are gaining traction in Washington and some state legislatures, meaning even local level. It says the combination of policies could significantly reduce the flow of remittances between, again, clamping down on illegal immigration, deporting people, making it harder for people to enter yet again, taxing at the federal level, maybe taxing at the state level, money flowing out of the country. A lot of this money is going to be cut off. It says this undermines the economic growth and potentially provoking instability in a region caught in a protracted low-growth trap, economists and analysts told AQ. On that note, the new economic outlook for the United States is we're no longer heading into recession. They've now canceled that. At least for America, probably not for a lot of other places. It says the effects will be felt most acutely, though, in Mexico, which receives the highest volume of U.S. remittances at about $60 billion per year, equivalent to almost 4% of GDP. 4% of Mexico's GDP comes from illegal workers sending money home. Actually, the drug trade also represents roughly like 3% of Mexico's GDP also. On this point, it also adds the Central American and Caribbean countries where they are especially vital to their economic engine. Nicaragua, which receives remittances equivalent to about 28% of its GDP. Honduras, about 26% of their GDP is from remittances. El Salvador, 24% of their GDP is from remittances. Guatemala, 20%. Haiti, 18%. And Jamaica, 17%. That's pretty massive. Again, it's a huge part of the economies for, some of these countries. They quite literally depend on money from people entering the United States, working here, and then sending money home. A huge chunk of their economy depends on this. And keep in mind, too, if you're talking about GDP, not all parts of gross domestic product have to do with, the average person. When you're talking about GDP, a lot of that money is being scooped up by the, quote-unquote 1%. And in a lot of these other countries, you have a much higher contrast between rich and poor. Meaning, of course, when you're talking like 2% GDP, 4% GDP, especially 28% GDP, that money is for the poor communities. That money is for the not wealthy people. Whereas the rest of the GDP, a lot of that will not actually be felt or benefit the majority of the country. In other words, America is kind of subsidizing, the livelihoods of the underclass of a lot of these countries through allowing for relatively open border illegal immigration and allowing for no taxes on remittances, at least until now. Now, the story also notes in some countries it represents around a quarter of their GDP. That is a lot of money. But the concern around that money isn't even just about legislation to tax, or restrict remittances. Even programs for mass deportations would really cut into that money. And Trump is, of course, very actively trying to do that right now. And on that point also, though, when it comes to remittances and taxes and everything else, these are not new threats. Trump was threatening to even ban remittances altogether going to Mexico during his first term in office. That was the time when Trump was saying he wanted to build a big, beautiful wall and Mexico is going to pay for it. He was using a potential ban altogether on remittances to Mexico as one of the pressure points against them and to, again, have them pay for the wall. That he would take money from remittances to pay for the border wall. Although the threatened ban on remittances, it never happened. They never actually did it. We'll see if this bill actually does pass Congress. Republicans do seem to have the votes for it. The way this particular type of bill works, because it's kind of getting Trump's budget back in order, they don't need the normal filibuster process, meaning if Republicans get the votes, they can pass it. Remittances are not the only issue on the bill. In fact, I'd say there are other things on the bill that are probably more politically controversial than even remittances. But given the bill is meant to give Trump what he needs to jumpstart his administration, it's also, complicated on that front. Remember last time they had one of these big budgets going through, Chuck Schumer, a Democrat, broke ranks, voted with Republicans to prevent a government shutdown, gave Trump the budget effectively. He was deeply criticized by the Democrats for doing that, but he said that if the other option was on the table and they let the government get shut down, that would have been worse for them. And look, on the point of remittances, yes, what we're talking about right now is a Republican bill. It's not Trump making an order on it. He's also talking about that, though. It is totally possible, if Congress fails to pass this bill, that Donald Trump, if he does, he's talking about doing it, if he does use executive action, he might take it even further than the current proposal. If he were to put a higher tax on remittances, something beyond 5%, 5% is not a massive tax. It's still more than the founding fathers of America probably would have tolerated, but it's still not a huge tax by comparison. Trump could actually make this much further beyond that if Congress does fail to act. And it would make working in the United States a lot less appealing for anybody wanting to come here, work, and then send money home. And again, this is not just about illegal immigrants. This is also for people on various types of visas. Now look, meanwhile, on a slightly different issue, we're now getting some details on just how much money the United States brought in through all the Liberation Day tariffs, right? Trump said, Liberation Day. We're going to be tariffing the world and making America great again. He said this is in their monthly Treasury statement of the U.S. government. They have receipts and outlays of the United States government. They note in April, just recently, $16.3 billion in customs duties came in. That's tariffs. And since the start of the fiscal year, it begins in October, gross receipts on tariffs is $63.3 billion. This is up nearly $16 billion compared to the prior fiscal year to date. So they are bringing in a lot more money. Now, Just the News said this. They said the Treasury Department on Monday reported the United States brought in a record-breaking $16.3 billion in duties from customs in April, marking a $7.6 billion increase from March. The increase comes after the Trump administration levied heavy tariffs on U.S. trading partners, including tariffs on steel and aluminum, and products from Canada and Mexico. Again, all these Liberation Day tariffs, right? It notes further in, the U.S. total surplus for April was $258 billion, an increase of 23% from the same period a year ago. But it adds, the United States, the U.S., is still seeing a $1.05 trillion deficit for the current fiscal year through April, which is also 23% higher than a year ago, according to the Wall Street Journal. Now, look, on that front, that money represents the roughly 10% tariffs that Trump has placed on most countries on the face of the planet, with the exception of China. They were hit initially with a 145% tariff. It's a big tariff. Trump has since brought that down to 30% while they try to work at a deal over the next 3 months. But on the point of tariffs, though, and what Trump is talking about his plan is for that, Trump has suggested that income for the United States from tariffs could be so much money we wouldn't even know what to do with it. It's not at that level yet. He's saying it could end up replacing federal income tax for most Americans. So sit tight, it may help you. The concept going around is that if you're making less than about $200,000 a year, you may soon not have to pay federal income tax. But let's break it down because we're getting some numbers on it. While the amount of money the country is making through tariffs right now is, it's quite a bit. It's not a small issue. It's not likely to hit the tax replacement levels just yet. The United States brought in about, $2.4 trillion in income tax revenue last year. It's a rough estimate that somewhere in the area of, $750 billion of that was from Americans making less than $200,000 a year. So if they're saying that they want to cancel that out using tariffs, if things go at the current rate, the United States should bring in around $120 billion roughly from tariffs this year. That's still quite a bit, but that does fall short of us not having to pay taxes just yet. The tax replacement levels are not coming through, is the way it's looking. Still a lot of money, great for the economy. you're probably still going to pay taxes for the foreseeable future. On to another topic, though. Minnesota is now preparing for potential riots. Why is that? Well, there's been growing pressure for President Donald Trump to issue a pardon for former police officer Derek Chauvin, who was sentenced to 22.5 years in prison over the death of George Floyd. And that incident, as you may remember, that was one of the key issues that was used to spark the BLM riots. That was some of the bigger riots, in fact. It's not clear whether Donald Trump would actually pardon him. There is a very big push for it right now, though. The Independent noted this. It said Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene has called on President Donald Trump to issue a federal pardon to Derek Chauvin, the Minneapolis police officer convicted over the killing of George Floyd on May 25, 2020. And she said, quote, I strongly support Derek Chauvin being pardoned and released from prison. The MAGA Congresswoman, it says, posted on X on Wednesday, adding her voice to a growing MAGA push for his release. And she said as well, quote, George Floyd died of a drug overdose. There's mixed analysis on that. There were different autopsy reports. One of them did say that. They overruled that and had another one that said he didn't. Now, like on Tuesday, it says Minnesota Governor Tim Walz responded to rumors that Trump could pardon Chauvin as the 5th anniversary of Floyd's passing approaches, reminding the public that any pardon would only apply to the inmate's federal sentence. Again, it says his state sentence would still stand, and that's a big point on this. I'll get into it. But on this point as well, and it's that MAGA allies, as they call him, Ben Shapiro, I don't know if he's a MAGA ally so much, he goes against Trump quite a bit also. But also Elon Musk and Charlie Kirk have previously backed calls for Chauvin's release, and conservative pundit Tim Pool, it says, for one, responded positively to Greene's endorsement, writing on X, quote, Derek Chauvin did nothing wrong. Now, if you go by the actual police reports and everything else, and even different camera angles, you'll see that the camera angles show that Derek Chauvin's knee was not on the neck of George Floyd, it was on his upper back. You will also know that in the police training manuals, protocol manuals, actually putting your knee on someone's neck until they lose consciousness is actually approved protocol. Many people say based on that alone that Derek Chauvin should have never been thrown in prison in the first place. He was basically following police doctrine in that particular area. Every part of the country is going to have different doctrine, different approved methods. He was effectively following what was in the actual manuals. The other argument, of course, is that George Floyd had lethal levels of fentanyl in his system. It does seem to be that is relatively understood, but the question is what killed him first, the fentanyl or the officer? Now, on this point, though, it also notes that others among Trump supporters are calling for President Donald Trump to pardon Derek Chauvin. There is, in fact, a very big push for this. And on that front also, Minnesota, they are preparing for any such circumstance coming about. And notes here, Governor Tim Walz, who you might remember was the running mate for Kamala Harris as vice president. So again, very much not a Trump fan. Governor Tim Walz, the Minnesota National Guard, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, and Hennepin County Sheriff Dewana Witt have reportedly all been briefed for preparations for potential riots if former police officer Derek Chauvin is granted a presidential pardon. It says, according to a report from local station KSTP, quote, multiple sources told 5 Eyewitness News that Governor Tim Walz, again, these other individuals, will all have been briefed on preparations for possible civil unrest if President Donald Trump pardons former Minneapolis police officer Derek Chauvin for his federal conviction of killing George Floyd. Now, on that point, this is the thing a lot of people are leaving out. Even if Donald Trump issued a pardon, it would only apply to the federal charges. It would not apply to the local charges. What does that mean? Derek Chauvin would still be held on the state charges, and that includes the murder charges. So even if Trump pardoned him, he would not be released from prison. It's not like Derek Chauvin would be set free. He would still be facing his 22.5-year sentence. His entire prison sentence would still stand. The federal charges, were mostly about civil rights charges, and it did not really affect his sentencing. It would not affect anything. A presidential pardon basically would be symbolic, meaning, of course, at least in my take, the preparations for riots and stuff. This looks more like a political move, if you were to ask me. I don't think Trump would do it because it would not actually get him out of prison. If Trump wanted to free Derek Chauvin, they'd have to reinvestigate the entire case. Currently, there's no signs they're doing that, but remember what Trump did as one of his day one orders. He ordered a 4-year retroactive review of, basically every single issue, every single case going through the federal government when it comes to what they call the weaponization of government. They've made some recent announcements on there's a very big push for that. Will that apply to Derek Chauvin? Well, that was 2020. That was still during the Trump administration, right? That was towards the end of the Trump administration. Although, if you include the sentencing when all that happened, it's right on the cusp. So maybe they will include it, maybe they won't. We have no clue. There's also the possibility, though, that Derek Chauvin's case could get re-examined. This is the other important part with it. He did get the ability to have heart tissue from George Floyd analyzed to see what the cause of death was. That does not include looking into like fentanyl poisoning. They're mainly looking to see whether George Floyd had an underlying heart condition that would have contributed to his death, meaning the shock of the incident caused his death. That is what they're currently looking at. The important part with that is that, again, that would only apply to the federal charges. That would not apply to the state ones. Derek Chauvin's push for an appeal, he's not getting anything at the state level. The most he could overturn, even if that totally went through, even with a federal pardon, it would really only apply to the civil rights conviction that in no way affects his overall sentencing. So again, it probably would not do anything. It would be symbolic. I don't know if it would cause riots because he would not be set free, but the media, depending on how the media covers it, could probably spark riots. If journalists went and said, oh no, Derek Chauvin's been pardoned, how dare Trump do this, and did not give the deeper details that he's not going to be released from prison because of the state charges, and Trump cannot overturn that. And if the local officials are, making a big deal about it and giving speeches on it, they may, through the extension of misleading the public about the nature of this, they might actually spark riots if they can misrepresent it enough. So we'll see what happens with it. My personal take, Trump probably will not pardon him. In fact, Trump has even suggested he has no plans to do it. This looks, in my personal opinion, more like they're trying to bring the issue out again because it's the 5-year anniversary of George Floyd's death. And then they're reintroducing it in the headlines. Look, in other news, though, you might have heard the rumors going around that Donald Trump was deporting children who are American citizens. This was one of the more contentious issues. If Trump really were deporting American citizens, that would be a big deal, especially kids. It turned out the case is just not what people claimed it was. It turned out it was a lot of misleading stuff. I'll be talking more about this after we come back from a quick break.
Experts agree. One of the best ways to protect against financial uncertainty is to diversify your portfolio. Learn how physical gold and silver can secure your retirement funds from today's economic challenges. With a gold IRA from American Hartford Gold, you can safeguard your wealth with no penalties or taxes when you transfer your current qualifying retirement accounts. Call now and our precious metals specialists will send you a free information kit, no cost or obligation. American Hartford Gold, a trusted industry leader with an A+ from the Better Business Bureau, has a 5-star rating from thousands of happy clients. Whether you are getting physical precious metals in a gold IRA or delivered to your doorstep, we offer only the highest quality gold and silver. For your peace of mind, we also offer a no-fee buyback commitment, a low-price guarantee, along with free shipping and free insurance. So don't wait. Call the number on your screen today and secure your financial future.
Welcome back. You might have heard rumors going around that Donald Trump was deporting children who are American citizens. How many of you heard that story? Now, that, of course, started a lot of controversy. I mean, obviously, if Trump were deporting American citizen kids, that would be a big deal. A lot of media reported it. There were lawsuits over it. In fact, the American Civil Liberties Union filed a lawsuit on it. Everybody covered it. Everybody was talking about it. People were angry about it. There were protests on it. What happened? Well, it turned out that the entire case was not what people claimed it was. There was fake information in that. American citizen children are not being rounded up. They are not being deported technically. There's a bit of a caveat to that. What has happened is this. If an illegal immigrant gets deported, they can choose, they can request to have their kids being brought with them. And if the kids are American citizens, which again, if they came here and had kids, because of birthright citizenship, the kids automatically get citizenship. Again, they can choose voluntarily to have the kids get brought with them, rather than being forced to abandon the kids, which would probably be even more contentious. In light of this whole fact coming out that this is the parents requesting this is voluntary, it's not like Trump is rounding up American citizen kids and sending them out. The ACLU has actually now dropped its lawsuit against the Trump administration, meaning it's fake information, even the lawsuit is dropped. Breitbart said this. It said the Department of Homeland Security, DHS, announced that the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, dropped its lawsuit alleging the department unlawfully deported a U.S. citizen child along with the child's mother to Honduras. In an announcement Saturday, DHS referred to the suit as baseless lawfare, again, using lawsuits as a form of warfare, lawfare, legal warfare. And notes the ACLU filed the lawsuit after ICE, again, Immigration Customs Enforcement, removed Jenny Carolina Lopez Villela, an illegal alien and Honduran national. And it says, according to ICE, Villela chose to leave the United States with her 2-year-old child. In other words, she chose to do so. Shortly after the removal of Villela, the ACLU filed the lawsuit questioning the circumstances of the departure of Villella's child against Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and the Department of Homeland Security. Further in it states, DHS Assistant Secretary for Public Affairs, Tricia McLaughlin, commented on the ACLU's decision to drop the lawsuit, saying, quote, the ACLU dropped its lawsuit on the false claims that DHS deported a U.S. citizen. The truth is, and has always been, that the mother, who was in the country illegally, chose to bring her 2-year-old with her to Honduras when she was removed. The narrative that DHS is deporting American children is false and irresponsible, meaning the media lied to you yet again. On that point, for a lot of people, the entire controversy, the narrative around, American kids getting deported, it's likely still going to stand. A lot of people will continue believing this, continue saying it. It's going to be the chant at protests, regardless of this coming out. Why is that? It's because it's the way emotional memory works. It's a Pavlov's dog type thing. If you condition the dog to salivate at the sound of the bell, even when no food is present, you can condition people to become angry at the sight of a political issue by feeding them a false narrative. Continually feeding them false narratives as a form of agitation propaganda. You incite an emotional reaction. What then happens? They have an unconscious emotional reaction when these stimuli is presented to them because they have developed an emotional memory. That is the way propaganda works. In other words, if you agitate people using false stories, you make them angry, you make them disgusted, you make them hateful, and you continue doing this, it doesn't matter if the thing you use to agitate them gets proven to be false, because the emotional manipulation, the emotional memory will remain. Meaning the damage is already done for a lot of people, even though the narrative is fake. Many people will continue using this, many people continue believing it, even though it's been disproven, because that's the way human nature is. This is the it's propaganda. This is how propaganda works. Once people assume something is true, it's very hard to change it. Once the ideas are set, it's very hard to change. And of course, it's also true that some American citizen kids are getting deported. So that is also true. The important part is the technicalities of that. And the big difference is it's voluntary. This is not them being rounded up and sent out. This is a voluntary process. Now, personally, I think this is a topic, it would be controversial either way. If parents allow, look, if you allow the parents to bring their kids with them, it's controversial because you are having kids being brought with parents, being deported, and you could say the kids are being deported. Technically they are. Technically they are, but it's a voluntary process by request of the parents and the families. On the other hand, what is the alternative? If they deport the parents and then make them, leave the kids behind, that would be controversial too. If they did not send the kids with the parents, I'd say that would be more controversial. I think that'd be an even bigger issue, and I think probably a lot more people would be angry about that. So the question is, which is the way to do it? The only other alternative is you don't enforce border laws at all, and you let them all stay. But that sends a message also that, again, illegal immigration is okay, that we no longer enforce it. And, the administration is not going to do that. This was also the policy of previous administrations, going all the way back to Bill Clinton when they went to the home of Elias Gonzalez and pointed an MP5 at his face and deported him. One of the bigger controversies of the Clinton administration, as you might remember. Again, who was an illegal immigrant from Cuba. He was a kid. They sent him back home. This has not been something that's unusual with deportation policies. But also just briefly, Donald Trump is continuing his tour of the Middle East. He wrapped up his visit to Qatar yesterday, going to the UAE now. Afterwards, the White House issued a statement on a very big, what Trump would call beautiful probably, economic deal that was made there. The White House announced this. They say, making American manufacturing and innovation great again. Today in Qatar, President Donald J. Trump signed an agreement with Qatar to generate an economic exchange worth at least $1.2 trillion. It says President Trump also announced economic deals totaling more than $243.5 billion between the United States and Qatar, including an historic sale of Boeing aircraft and GE Aerospace engines to Qatar Airways. Now, that's a big deal, by the way, folks. What does this mean? It means the United States is now going to have long-term engagement with these countries. If you sign an economic deal with, again, more than $1 trillion on the line, and again, that's not like they just handed Trump $1 trillion in a suitcase. This is an economic deal of economic exchange between both countries over the course of 10 years. Trump made a very similar deal as well with Saudi Arabia. What does that mean? It means we're now economically engaged with these countries on a much deeper level, meaning our economies are more tightly engaged, meaning we're going to have a bigger footprint in these regions, not the way we used to do it, but the new way we're doing it. In other words, we're not sending troops there, we're sending jet engines and medications and things for trade. This is economic exchange now, a very big change in policy. Now, similar to his meetings in Saudi Arabia, Donald Trump received a royal welcome in Qatar. He was very happy about this. There were police officers in cyber trucks accompanying his motorcade. They even had a lot of camels for the welcome. It was a whole big affair, right? And Donald Trump is good at reading the room, I'd say. In fact, this is Donald Trump at the reception in Qatar making comments on the room and the camels. Watch this.
I just want to thank you for everything, and maybe in particular our friendship. It's been a very loyal, great, beautiful friendship. And the job you've done is second to none. You look at this, it's so beautiful. As a construction person, I'm seeing perfect marble. This is what they call perfecto. And just a great job you've done, and what a beautiful place. And we appreciate those camels. I haven't seen camels like that in a long time. And that was some greeting. We appreciate it very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Anyways, what beautiful marble you have, right? Anyways, folks, that said, let's jump into some questions. If you have a question, comment, leave it in the chat. We'll get to it now. Please do not forget to hit the like button also. That said, again, leave your questions. Let's jump into them. Let's see here. I saw some of you asking about Qatar and terror sponsoring and stuff. That's an issue with that whole region. in my personal take, I think Trump is looking at this a bit differently. Folks, okay, how many Americans were killed by terrorists last year? How many Americans were killed by fentanyl last year? Where does fentanyl come from? What are the organizations engaged in the fentanyl trade? What is our trade relationship with the countries where that came from? I'd say, frankly, Mexico's engagement with the drug cartels is killing more Americans than terrorists. And again, the cartels are now designated as a terrorist organization. Does that mean we don't have trade with Mexico? No, it does not. Does that mean we don't trade with Canada, where they discovered one of the largest fentanyl labs, and where until recently they didn't really even have, they didn't really do a lot even to secure their border? No, it didn't change anything. For Trump, I think he's viewing this on that scale. You know, a lot of other countries we engage with do things that are very hostile towards America, do things that do kill Americans. The Chinese Communist Party is behind a lot of the fentanyl trade. They do a lot of terrible things against the United States, spies and everything else. We still trade with them. We still have business with them. I disagree with that. I don't think we should, but we still do it. And I think Trump is viewing that on the same side, basically, with Qatar, and Saudi Arabia is on the better end of it. You know, in terms of the region, you're going to have terrorists in every country just because of ideology, but these are among the better players. And I think Trump is assuming, I think he's betting that basically it is better to fix relations and try to cool down the entire issue rather than have the divisions make the problems worse. He's even talking about engaging with Iran, but he did explain this, that the only condition would be Iran needs to stop sponsoring terrorism. That's one of the conditions. And they also need to get rid of their nuclear programs and nuclear weapons programs. And actually, Iran is suggesting they may do it. And that's the other argument, is that if you can create good diplomatic relationships, good trade relationships, the governments themselves may, clamp down even harder on the terror groups because they don't want it to damage relations with their good friend, America. I would actually point as an example of this to the way the Chinese Communist Party does it. Look, the CCP is probably the greatest abuser of Muslims in the world. They literally enslave them. They use them as living sources for organ transplants. They insanely abuse them. They torture them. They kill them. And does that impact the CCP's relations with countries that are even some of the biggest terror sponsors in the world, including Iran, including Pakistan? No. Why is that? Why is that? Why do the terrorist groups not care about the CCP torturing, killing, enslaving Muslims? Maybe it's because it's more about politics than ideology. Maybe that's the reason. And so Trump, I think, can actually fix a lot of that through doing this. I really think he can. On that point as well, frankly, I'm absolutely against terrorism. Absolutely so. It's one of the issues that I have a very absolute position on. I absolutely oppose terrorism. But I would also say that, frankly, the drug cartels in Mexico are a bigger problem than them. And hey, guess who's now on the terror list? The drug cartels in Mexico. Good. So, and they kill more Americans. They've killed more Americans than a major war. And we should understand it like that. That is a form of modern warfare. They're a bigger problem. On another point here, Wilma, I will add, though, a lot of those countries, they're also big money behind a lot of people. And people have pointed to Qatar giving a lot of money to news outlets and politicians and big voices and stuff. There's a lot of that going on. It's not just Qatar doing it, though. That's an issue globally. A lot of countries want to buy influence in the United States. A lot of them do buy influence in the United States. And to an extent, we allow some of our politics and policy, and we allow for a lot of foreign subversion, frankly. Will that change? I don't know. It is also part of the way business is done. Look, a lot of people were criticizing, the Obamas and Hunter Biden and so on for, foreign deals and so on. Donald Trump is doing it too. His family's also getting business deals in Qatar and stuff, and speaking events. Is that a bad thing? Look, a lot of us were saying yes 4 years ago. A lot of us are saying no now. So, I do think partisan opinion comes into play here quite a bit on whether you think it's a good thing or bad thing. But I would also say this does seem to it's just kind of the way things are, frankly. It's not illegal for the most. Some of it is, but for the most part, this is not illegal. It's just the way politics works. Unless they change the laws on this, that's the way it is. And some people would even argue it's good for foreign diplomacy. America, whether we like it or not, is deemed the world leader. And what does that mean? It means every country in the world wants to cozy up with the leader. They want to get in the good graces of the king. And we are considered the world leader. And the President of the United States has a lot of sway on that front. And so a lot of countries do want to influence American policies. Again, there's a lot of gray area with law, but we allow for a lot of foreign influence, frankly. And there's a lot of indirect ways that get around the law to do that. There is a lot of that going on, which I disagree with a lot of it as well. But look, I'm a bit of a stoic on this front. As Marcus Aurelius would say, if you go to the baths, you got to set your expectation. There's going to be noisy kids and things that annoy you and everything else, because that is the way the world is, and you're not going to change everything. You know what I mean? Wilma Eden, question here. You're saying kicking China out of the Middle East, good move. Okay, so this is another big topic and another big thing that's going on with this. And Wilma, I think you're hitting on something really big here. On that front, okay, so there's a big push right now to fight back against CCP influence outside of China. This is one of the quiet wars taking place in the world. The Chinese Communist Party, as I've mentioned many, many times, a lot of its power is not internal. In fact, I'd say internally, they're not powerful at all right now. Internally, they're in crisis. Internally, the CCP has kind of fallen to pieces. The power of the CCP, a lot of its lifelines for survival are outside of China. It's foreign influence. It's foreign money. It's business deals. It's the Belt and Road Initiative. It's paid off foreign influencers, politicians, journalists, and the whole nine yards. It is the manipulation of public opinion to get investors pouring money into China. It's foreign influence. Back to the point of foreign influence. I think the CCP oversteps the line of legal ways to do that. They do a lot of very underhanded things, and frankly, I think we should boot out every one of them when it comes to their agents. We let a lot of it happen, especially with the United Front. But the United States is kind of going into is battling for a lot of countries in the world, because for many countries right now, they're having to make a decision. Do they choose the United States or do they choose China? Trump has incited a lot of this with the tariffs and also with a lot of foreign aid getting cut off. The United States, we pour money into a lot of countries. We give them foreign aid. We give them stuff through USAID, which apparently does not mean US aid. It's about like infrastructure and things like that. We pay for stupid things in those countries, and a lot of it doesn't actually go to things that would benefit U.S. interest. It's just we send money all over the world. That's what we're realizing. We make a lot of business deals where we massively lose. We don't make money on a lot of our business deals. We lose money. We allow countries to take advantage of us. We allow them to tariff us. We allow them to put extra duties on our products. We do a lot of things like that. Very nice of America. Very bad for Americans. We've not been doing things that are in the interest of the average person. China also does that. But when China goes to countries, what does it do? The CCP goes to countries, offers to build infrastructure, literally buys off and bribes the politician to make them sign bad deals that rip off the entire country. and I'm not exaggerating here. You can even read a lot of it's not even a partisan issue. You can read about what they call castle diplomacy. They call it castle diplomacy, where the Chinese Communist Party will bribe foreign leaders. They especially do this in Africa. They'll bribe the foreign leaders and they will literally build them castles, massive mansions, as a form of bribery to get them to sign bad deals that screw over their entire countries. And what do? The paid off, bribed, or blackmailed politician who just got his fancy new castle from China, what do? Well, now they sign a deal that gets the country into a debt trap. They sell out their country to the Chinese Communist Party. What does that mean? They get in a debt agreement, a very hostile, very much weaponized form of interest rate, where the country cannot pay it back. And when they default on that loan, when it turns out, hey, this is a predatory debt, when they default on it, the assets transfer to the Chinese Communist Party. So the CCP builds infrastructure using their own workers, not local labor, meaning this is Chinese jobs, not local jobs, meaning it benefits China, the Chinese economy, not the local economy. They then manage it, meaning this is long-term Chinese jobs, not local jobs. And then when the country defaults on it, not only do they gain control over the thing they built, meaning thank you very much, let me control your economy now, they also get, natural resources, other things from the country. They can seize, for example, timber production. They can get oil. They can get rare earth minerals. They get all that stuff. And what happens? Then it feeds into the CCP's global monopoly on a lot of these key resources. Now, a lot of that is through, they call it debt traps. Again, it's predatory loans with interest rates that are predatory. It's basically set up with the intent of making you default so the CCP gains control of key parts of your economy. And again, only signed into place because the politicians, more often than not, are knowingly signing a bad deal because they get paid off, because they're bought out by the CCP. And so that's the CCP's way of doing it. So America, we basically lose on everything. We help these countries. They don't even like us half the time. They take advantage of us. The CCP rips them off. And so a lot of countries now are having to choose, well, which one do you want? You pick, buddy. Free handouts, all the things we used to give you, trade deals, actually beneficial things, and at the very least mutually beneficial, or predatory loans, bribery, the whole 9 yards, and you lose your economy. Which one do you want? The issue is who's making the calls, because unfortunately the way the CCP does business is they buy off the politicians. And they buy off politicians, they buy off journalists, and they buy off business leaders. With the understanding that if you control the civil society, the leadership, the decision makers, you effectively control the country. You've created a puppet state. And so they use bribery and corruption as their tools for foreign conquest. They conquer countries through alternative means doing that, and they've done it to a lot of countries. So on that point, that being said, there are some countries that are well off enough where they've not completely sold out. A lot of Middle East powers are like that, especially when it comes to like Qatar and Saudi Arabia and so on. These are oil powers, energy industry is a lot of their money, and they do business with everybody. They do business with Russia, they do business with China, they do business with the United States. They get a lot of money, and they also use that money for a lot of foreign influence because they also want to play that game and make sure that they're keeping the business running, so to speak, right? Now, in a very similar way, America has had a rough issue with countries in the Middle East. What is the cause of that? Well, we have a very strong relationship with Israel, and Israel does not have a very strong relationship with a lot of those countries because of religious conflicts and ideology. That's the way it is. It was not always like that. If you want to know how that started, there's a great book called Disinformation by Ion Mihai Pacepa and Ronald Reichelt. Ion Mihai Pacepa was one of the former top generals under Ceausescu in Romania, under the communist regime in Romania. And he defected to the West. Ion Mihai Pacepa, I believe he was the highest-ranking Soviet bloc defector during the Cold War. So, this is credible. His claims are very credible. He noted what happened with this. So what happened, because look, many people who know history know that, and I don't want to get too deep in religion, but you'll know during the Ottoman Empire, Jews and Muslims used to get along just fine. That is totally true. They used to get along just fine. The Ottomans and the Christians did not get along very well, but there were a lot of Jews living in the Ottoman Empire. That was not that much of an issue. I think they had to pay the jizya or something like that. They had to pay like the religious tax if you're not a Muslim, but that was about it. On that front, what happened? When did the big conflict start between them and the Muslim world? A lot of that was during the Cold War. So what happened was this. First of all, Israel used to be a socialist country. It still technically is. Netanyahu is the one who did a lot of the economic reforms that made it more of a capitalist country. They were very much tied in with the Soviets. They were very much part of that bloc, but they went more towards America. The Soviet Union did not like that. When Israel moved more towards America, that caused a lot of problems diplomatically with the Soviet Union. At the same time, the Soviets, and especially Romania, were looking for ways to basically light a fire in the Middle East. They wanted to start movements there. They wanted to capture those countries. Deeper context of this, the Soviets and the Chinese Communist Party were training terrorist organizations. They trained, for example, what is his name? Yasser Arafat, which was again the Palestinian, Authority or Palestinian PLO, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, terrorist groups. They were, they were launching terror attacks, seizing airliners, seizing jets. Anybody who lived in that time remembers you were afraid to fly because the PLO was seizing jets and stuff and killing people. It was horrible. There were a lot of terror attacks. The Chinese Communist Party and the Soviet Union, both of them were training the terrorists. At the same time as they were doing this, you also had, earlier than this, the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt creating the Muslim Brotherhood model of Islam. You had an individual, Sayyid al-Qutb, I'm probably saying his name wrong. He wrote a book called In the Footsteps of the Quran, wherein he reinterpreted the Quran by merging the religion with communism. And that became the doctrine of they called it the Egyptian model of Islam. That started communist revolutions within the movements. Again, the Muslim Brotherhood became more of a communist organization, which then merged the concepts of Sharia law with communist violent revolution. That then led to the offshoot, which was Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda was the violent arm of that organization, violent revolution, again, communism. And they also were trying to spark Islamist revolutions in Muslim countries. Islamist as in politicized, socialized Islam, which was the Egyptian model, which went against which was actually a movement of liberalization within Islam. Westernization and liberalization, which is why they could live so harmoniously with Jews for so long, including again during the Ottoman Empire. Now the important part with Saudi Arabia, they failed to do that in Saudi Arabia. What's his name? Bin Salman, the crown prince, his father put down the revolution. He stopped the revolution. The leader of the revolution, it was a revolution among the princes. You have a lot of princes in Saudi Arabia. The leader of that revolution, the attempted one, trying to bring in what they called the Egyptian model of Islam, they failed to do it. It was an individual they called the Red Prince. The son of the Red Prince is Alawid bin Talal, who is one of the princes who's had a lot of open conflicts with bin Salman, the crown prince. I won't get too deep into the politics, but my point is this. You had communist movements spreading throughout the Muslim world, and a lot of that was tied in with issues relating to the Chinese Communist Party and the Soviet Union, wherein, just like in Africa, just like in Latin America, just like in the United States, they were sponsoring communist agitation movements. They were trying to start communist revolutions. Asia as well. A lot of the communist movements were either Maoist or Stalinist, meaning they were trained either by the Chinese Communist Party or by the Soviet Union. It was the same thing in the Muslim world. What else did they do? I mentioned the book Disinformation by Ion Mihai Pacepa and Ronald Reichlag. One of the methods they were using to try to turn the Muslim world against the United States, because remember, this was the Cold War, right? This was the Cold War. While you had a lot of these little battles taking place in every part of the world, you also had the big battle taking place, which was the United States against the Soviet Union, and to an extent the Chinese Communist Party, which was, again, they had, that was why Nixon opened up to China, to try to split them. What was the context of that? The Soviet Union needed to find a way to get the Muslim world to fight against America. What did they do? So Ion Mihai Pacepa, being one of the highest ranking defectors from the Soviet bloc. Again, technically Romania was not part of the Soviet Union, but they were part of that whole system. They were a communist country. When he defected, he revealed that he was actually given orders under Nicolae Ceausescu, the head of the Romanian communist regime, to spread the protocols of the Elders of Zion as a tool to radicalize the Muslim world against Israel. And they used propaganda saying Israel is the little Satan, America is the big Satan. And so because of America's relations with Israel, and again, Israel used to be a socialist country, it still technically is, again, Netanyahu is the one who's mostly changed that. They tied them together. And so they instigated a lot of the hatred towards Israel using the protocols of the Elders of Zion. And the real intent of that was to turn the hatred towards Israel, but really turn the whole Muslim world against the United States. And that, because of religion. They wanted to start a religious war. And that's how they did it. Long history, folks. Long history. On that point as well, the Protocols of the Elders of Zion was a rewriting of two other books. The original origin of that book was actually a book called the Meditations, something along the lines of the Meditations and Conversations in Hell of Machiavelli. And basically was going into Machiavellianism and explaining how he was subverting countries. Machiavelli, of course, I believe in Italy, and wrote the book The Prince, about how to wage unconventional war and control other countries through subversion. It was not related to Judaism. Again, this was Western subversion, very evil stuff in my opinion still. Machiavelli was I believe, a very evil man. So the original version was that. It was about Machiavellianism. That was later rewritten into a book about the Jesuits, and explaining how the Jesuits were doing very similar things, framing them. Again, I have nothing against the Jesuits, but somebody basically just replaced Machiavelli with the Jesuits and did a whole book about the Jesuits. Then what happened? Someone took the book on the Jesuits and replaced the Jesuits with the Jews, and that was used to create the Protocols of the Elders of Zion, which created this whole view that the Jews were the ones doing it, not the Jesuits, which was the previous one, and not Machiavellianism, which was the one before that. It was a plagiarism of a plagiarism, in other words, that just replaced the villain. And so the Soviets used that to turn the Muslim world against Israel and, through extension, against the United States. So that's how we got here. Long story. And back to the original question after this very long history lesson. As Wilma Eden notes, kicking China out of the Middle East, good move. Yeah, very deep footprints in those regions. And I do personally believe that if America can develop good economic ties, a lot of those countries will also fight back against the terrorists. A lot of those countries don't really like the terrorists. They're by no means the majority, especially in like Saudi Arabia and stuff. It's a minority there, and they don't like them either. And so you could see that happen. TZ Burton, another question, is saying the best case is no tariffs for the flow of goods and services, but you can't have free trade if protectionist policies are used on one side and not the other. And I would agree with that. I would fully agree with that. And this is the argument on the free market stance with Trump's use of tariffs. Look, I understand libertarianism. Maybe a lot of my economic views are more libertarian, but not absolute. I do believe in balanced trade, and I think if you believe in an absolute free market, you're probably going to let yourself get subverted. I believe there are too many issues with, again, underhanded means, with monopolies. You can have a business establish a monopoly and use really predatory practices, and effectively become just as powerful as a government. History has seen this happen. You can have businesses that are more powerful than governments. Okay, folks, funny question. How many governments did the Dole Banana Company overthrow throughout history? You might be shocked. A banana company, a company that literally harvests bananas, has overthrown a surprisingly number of governments. I'm not by any means a lot, but I'm part Native Hawaiian. My grandma was half, right? And so I know the history of Hawaii. The Hawaiian government was overthrown by the Dole Banana Company. And they did that in a lot of like Latin American countries too. Somebody recently there was a meme going around where someone claimed that the Dole Banana Company was overthrowing another country, and Dole actually responded to it in a very funny post. Like, no, the last time we overthrew a country was in like the 1950s. It was like 50 years ago. We haven't done that in like 50 years, so they kind of joked about it. But my point with saying that is, if you have an absolute free market economy, and I know some, I shouldn't say free market economy. If you have free market absolutism, where some people are even like anarcho-capitalists, where you believe in no government, but let the businesses judge things, you will have businesses that become so powerful that they basically become governments anyways. History has seen this. History has seen it, where businesses just become the government. Look at the history of Dole Banana. I'm not trying to throw Dole Banana Company under the bus. I like their bananas. I eat them. I'm part Native Hawaiian. I have nothing against it. Frankly, I think that if Hawaii was not taken over by the Dole Banana Company and they handed over to the United States, the Japanese probably would have taken it during World War II. We're better off, frankly. But after that little caveat, my point with free markets is this. There are a lot of countries that use underhanded means. A lot of countries use state-subsidized systems where they will subsidize a product, undercut a market, put their competitors out of business, buy their competitors, and then control the global economy. Do you let that happen? If you allow that to happen, what's going to be the result of it? If you say absolute free market, but you're letting China, which is, I'm not even giving a hypothetical here, they do this. If you believe in absolute free markets and you're letting another country violate free market principles without any pushback because you're like, hey, free market, what's going to happen? They are going to conquer the world, and you are going to become a vassal state of that country because you said, hey, free markets. What was one of the key goals of communism, as Karl Marx stated? Seize the means of production. Seize the means of production. What are the means of production? Those are your businesses. Those are your factories. It's not just the production, it's the means of production. Businesses, factories, farms, the whole agriculture, the industry. It's your logistics, it's your natural resources, it's the entire industrial complex, everything tied in with it, which means everything basically. All natural resources, all means of producing things from the natural resources, and the businesses tied with them. Now I will ask you, in the greater sense of the word right now, who controls the means of production? Who has the factories? Who controls a lot of the world's natural resources? Who controls, through extension of that, a lot of the logistics? Well, China does. Why do they control it? Well, it's because they've been using state-subsidized companies and predatory trade practices to go in and make business deals, screw over the entire countries, put their businesses out of business, buy up their businesses, obtain their natural resources, and then dominate them because they then control the economies of those countries. If you control the businesses, you control the media. If you control the media, you control the votes. If you control the votes, you control the politics. Simple. Classic Machiavellianism, by the way. The West, under Machiavelli, did this too. Machiavelli also talked about using mafias to do this, using the gangster state to achieve this, which the CCP also does, by the way. The United Front is tied in with the Chinese mafia on that front. And they do it through the drug trade also. And so the question is, what does America do about this, right? If they're, and it's not even just that extent, because I'm talking about one of the worst examples. Even on the mid-level, you have a lot of countries that tariff us, and we don't tariff them back. The result of that is we have capital outflow. The circulation of money is what creates a healthy economy. If you create unequal outflow of currency, it means that the money is not flowing within your economy, it is flowing out to another country, and slowly it is going to drain the wealth of your nation. That is one argument for printing of new money, by the way. If I know I'm often sounding like I'm a big opponent of fiat currency and the printing of new money and inflation. One of the big arguments, and there's a few, this is one of the big arguments in defense of it, is that you create new currency so that as the outflow takes place, you have new currency flowing within the economy. That's one of the reasons they do it. And one of the historical reasons you do that, by the way, is because if you're using gold or silver, bullion and so on, you can only have so much gold leave your country before you're out of gold. Right? And so if you're using gold as your direct currency, you cannot have it leave your country. So the way countries used to deal with this, to make sure you don't have capital outflow, to make sure you're not being drained, that the blood of your country is not on a slow drip or a fast drip in modern cases, is you use tariffs. That is why tariffs exist. That's why they do it. Because you need to offset the outflow by putting additional duties on the goods to compensate for the outflow. Now that does mean it still benefits the workers. The factory workers here selling their goods here, they still get money, they still benefit, and so on. The foreign good typically becomes a luxury good because it has to compete with local markets. It means that people here can charge more money and they have to charge a little less. So it's good for everybody. Foreign trade in that regard is beneficial for everyone. Nobody on the government level, nobody really wins, but nobody really loses. And the workers, the factories, the logistics, the markets, everybody's happy. But you got to equal it out. If another country tariffs you, you need to meet that with equal tariffs. If you trade everybody, I think he said America does not have a deficit with two countries on the face of the planet. They're not even very big countries. He says he's not going to name them because if he did name them, they'd probably be like, well, why are we the idiots trading at a loss with you? Why are we the only ones? Back to the point. The reason you have tariffs and duties and so on is to equalize outflow versus inflow. And countries would do this to each other to maintain that, to prevent capital outflow, to eliminate deficits. You're supposed to use tariffs to offset the deficit, put simply, and that's the reason for it. And so I would say that is free market economies. Now, ideally, if through the use of tariffs, you can force the other country to reduce their tariffs, so both countries reduce them all the way down as low as they can go, then good for everyone. But if they tariff you, you need to match it. Otherwise, you're dealing with capital outflow and it will drain your economy. And on that point, this is the same argument with remittances, right? How do you balance remittances? That's also an issue. The other front is Trump may consider using tariffs to offset remittances to Mexico or other Latin American countries. Because again, a healthy, sustained economy cannot have unequal outflow in the long term if you're going to have a healthy economy. In my mind, this is free market. These are free market principles. But it's free market principles applied to the whole world, not just to one country. Because if you're playing a game, if you're playing a board game and you're saying, I'm going to play by the rules, but I'm going to let you violate the rules, what's going to happen? If you're going to play a game, everybody needs to play by the same rules. The free market works like that. If I'm going to follow free market principles, you have to as well. And if you violate free market principles, then I will counter that with an equal weight. And that, by the way, is how I view, personally, a true, healthy, functioning free market. Not a, I'll follow the rules, but you don't have to type free market, because you're going to be conquered if you do that. So it's the way the world works. Is that a good thing it works that way? No, I wish it wasn't that way, but it is the way the world works. You know what I mean? You got to be realistic with the nature, with human nature, right? On that front. Again, good old stoicism. You gotta base your expectations in reality. Don't expect the world or people to be something they're not. You gotta base your actions and the way you respond to them based on the realities of the way that people are. And don't make such a big deal about it. Don't be so moved by it. And you can still be a good person amidst it, but you need to be realistic, right? And so as far as I see it, tariffs, are they nice? No. Are they necessary? Yes. And it's for the reasons I explained. And again, and this is my opinion, right? This is my personal take. So, folks, that said, today is Thursday. Week's going by quick. Join me again tomorrow, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time. In the meantime, please share this video. Please give us a like. Most importantly, though, please leave a comment. I think of all things, actually, comments probably help the most, especially if you're on YouTube, by the way. We are trying to regrow ourselves on YouTube. You might have seen we're kind of bouncing back as much as we can while still being demonetized. It's just the reality of it. Please leave a comment. Let me know what you think of the show. Again, I'm also collecting ideas right now. If there is something you would like me to cover, if there's a feature idea, I want to expand. I want to even talk about just cool stories. If you know something kind of cool in your area, let me know. I would like to even do some more just culture and human interest stuff, actually. I want to get back also into investigations and stuff. I know I haven't been on the ground in a few months. I'm going to be getting out again. As I mentioned, starting next week, we will not have an episode on Fridays. The reason for that is I want to start doing more investigations, and I need a day to do it, frankly. So, again, the reason I'm doing that is because I'm going to be starting these features again. So, if you have ideas, suggestions, cool stuff, or possible investigations, let me know in the comments. That said, folks, thank you so much for being here. Join me tomorrow again, 10:30 a.m. Eastern Time, and as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.